back to Where Do You Feel That in Your Body? As you may know by now, my name is Lisa and I'm the host of this. And today I have a very exciting episode planned with a very good friend of mine named Desiree, who I will let introduce herself a little bit further in a moment. But as stated in other videos, it's really just important for listeners and watchers to understand that these are just our opinions, our own personal thoughts. Some of our experience, but none of this should be taken as fact to it. Let me just introduce my friend Desiree. And Desiree, if you just want to go ahead and take a few moments to introduce yourself, National Farmer Mental Health Alliance, anything you'd like to share.
Yes, thank you for having me on, Lisa. I appreciate being here today. So my name is Desiree. I am a co-director of student engagement at the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance. Um, so a little bit about me specifically is I grew up in Southern Alberta on a beef production. We raised Red Angus cross beef cattle, and as well as we grew a lot of cereal crops, grains, wheats, canola, um, rye, alfalfa, a whole bunch of agricultural and cereal crops. Um, and a lot of farmers will introduce themselves as a third, fourth, or fifth generation farmer. So myself, I would have been the fourth generation, and then my sister's children would be fifth generation in the farming industry. So National Farmer Mental Health Alliance is an alliance that was created um, basically to help bridge the gap between a lot of mental health counselors that didn't have an agricultural background or awareness of the agricultural community, and that were interested in finding and developing their agricultural informed therapy practice. So when we think of different therapy techniques, we think about maybe trauma informed therapy or certain cultural and ethnic informed therapy. When we talk of agricultural informed therapy, it kind of falls in the same line. It's a unique experience that a lot of people will say is a unique culture in and of itself. And so the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance provides training and courses for mental health professionals to become agriculturally informed therapists.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And prior to having this discussion with you, when you messaged me being like, "Oh, I get to be a part of this thing with National Farmer Mental Health Alliance," I myself had no understanding of farmer and agricultural informed mental health services. And so I think that this is an incredible initiative, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into this further with you. And one of my first questions is about what you think is one of the most or some of the more major misconceptions about farmers and mental health in general. And maybe before you answer, I saw this reel recently that said that farmers were the happiest people. And then, I was reading your agency's website and learning a lot more about this. And so I'm just wondering if you can maybe speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a romanticized view that can be based in reality on what it is to live a farming lifestyle. A lot of us think about, oh, I'd love to grow old and have a hobby farm and just, an acre or two and a cow and a chicken. And that is a wonderful idea. And farming is a really rewarding industry to be a part of, but it can come with a lot of unique stressors. It can come with high anxiety. A lot of people's income, when you're speaking about an agricultural concept here, it comes maybe once or twice a year. So whereas we might be used to having a paycheck that comes twice a month, there's a lot of financial stress that can come in to play here when we talk about, okay, we need to make whatever we get last for a full season. And not to mention, there's a lot of finances that are tied up in an ownership. There's not a lot of um, cash resources. A lot of it is in equipment. A lot of that's invested in land and other resources. So you may have a higher instance of maybe not a higher number in the bank, but a higher number in property and resources. So there can be a lot of different stressors in that way, and a lot of things are out of a farmer's control. So weather is probably the number one thing that a lot of people will think of. You can do a whole year's worth of work to be almost completely wiped out in a day if the weather is just going to be terrible, if there's floods, if there's droughts, and not even always in your area. It can be on the other side of the world, can totally affect how your prices are perceived when you go to take your animals to market. So there are a lot of aspects that you don't have control over that can produce a lot of anxiety for people that are in the agricultural community as well. So yes, it can be very rewarding to be your own boss. It can be very rewarding to reap the benefits of a harvest and see, that crop going into the grain bin at the end of the year and feel a sense of relief. It can also be the other way and extremely stressful, and you feel like the entire world is on your shoulders because no one's going to pull you out of it.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I can only imagine the feelings of uncertainty and the weight of, having a family to feed and a family to take care of while also being up against all of these unpredictable factors as a farmer.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of isolation that can go into it
Mm.
as well. So often farmers are used to be given the tools to fix things themselves. They're not often um, given anything other than the resources to figure it out. Whereas if we think about, if your car breaks down, you're not going to be given the tools to just figure it out yourself. You're going to take it to someone and outsource that problem. So I think for farmers, when we think of mental health resources, they're so used to just having to figure it out on their own that I think that can be kind of the perception of outsourcing a problem as well. It's, well, I'm the only one here, so I have to be the only one to figure it out by myself. No one's going to help me out with this.
Okay, yeah, one of the things I really wanted to ask you was considering what one of the main barriers might be to reaching this community and offering mental health services. And, I'm hearing you say like they kind of have this belief of and this experience of I have to do this on my own. And why would that be any different with mental health? And do you think that is like the main barrier? Are there other ones?
I think there's a lot of barriers. And again, I need to like preface this with saying like I don't represent every single farmer. I don't represent every geographical region. And same within the veterinary industry too, which I am a part of. I can't speak for every veterinary professional or employee either. But in speaking with just some other people that are also farmers or in the agricultural industry, a lot of them are in very geographically remote areas as well. When I think about my own experience, we didn't have internet access till I was about 13, 14 years old. So there is many communities out there that still don't have internet. So when we think of, oh, well, we can just do virtual sessions if you can't come into the city today to have a session. Well, maybe they can't. Maybe they
Mhm.
actually physically can't get into town, but maybe they also can't access a computer with internet resources to have a virtual session either. In that case, is having a phone call the only option that they have? Is if there are other resources that we can use to reach people that need help? We often think of remote Aboriginal or Indigenous communities that may have a lack of resources too, right? So there's a whole bunch of barriers that come to play, along with if you're your own employer, what benefits do you have for mental health services that start to stack up? If you're an employee of an organization that has great benefits, wonderful. You know, uh, my own health insurance that I've got from my veterinary employer used to have about a $500 max allowance for psychological services. When you think about breaking that down, if the average psychology session costs roughly $200, um, that's 2 sessions.
Yeah.
So where are we going to get with help within 2 sessions? And now we are definitely heading the right direction with more affordable health services and a pay what you can in a sliding scale model. But a lot of people just see that and think, well, it's not even an option. So why would I even start something that I know isn't going to follow through? Um, that being said, there are movements in place. Speaking of my mental health benefits, that allowance has been increased to $1,500 of coverage. So things are moving in the right direction. And again, I can't speak that every employee gets the same coverage, but starting to recognize that these barriers we need to work around. So cost, access to internet, geographical location, and not being able to get into town are just a few, but I think those might be the most poignant barriers at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up some really excellent points. And as you were speaking, I was just maybe getting curious about um, the likelihood of maybe therapists being willing to travel to farmers if that's the case, right? I mean, farmers, from my understanding, have a very busy schedule and are hardworking constantly, and maybe don't have time to take half a day to get into the city and back for an hour-long appointment. And if there's no internet and maybe a phone call is maybe not the best option. I'd just be curious if people have considered, and you might not know the answer to this, but just thinking out loud about the possibility of therapists maybe going to somebody and to those farmers rather than them coming to them.
Yeah, I think it can definitely be an interesting concept. As I'm not an active counselor yet, I can't speak to the efficacy of what that would be like. I know from my own experience that the perception that some people have of mental health professionals is very classical Freudian. I have to lay on a couch. This person's going to, be in a business suit or coming out to the farm in heels. And how do they expect to walk around out here? And they know nothing about my life, but they're, maybe pompous or book smart because they have education. And so there's some stigmas on both sides of the fence. I think that if as counselors we can, I don't want to say appear more relatable, but I think, you know, there was a really good quote that the CEO and founder of the National Mental Health Alliance um, had said, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was something along the lines of remembering that the farmer is the expert in their own field, no pun intended, but like coming to it and saying, only you know what it's like to be where you're at, and I don't, and I want to learn, but I also want you to know that I don't think that I'm better than you in any way. Even though I'm a mental health professional, it doesn't mean that I'm, you know, a better human being than you. And I think we have to be really careful, even how we dress, how we speak, using technical terms, but also not dumbing things down so that it's perceived that you are doing that on purpose either. So it's a tricky line to walk. I think definitely coming in person, if someone is willing to do that, would be great. I think it can be also very difficult because, I mean, we're talking about, are you willing to drive as a counselor an hour one way for a session?
Right.
Are you willing as a counselor to drive an hour back? Do you even have a vehicle that could get you there? So before you're willing to offer those, how invested are you? And would that jack the price up of a counseling session significantly that it wouldn't be worth it to the person anymore either? So a lot of things to consider, but I think it definitely needs to be discussed.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. And I love that you mentioned the word stigma about one, how maybe psychologists might be viewed coming into a farmer's world. And I think that's a really great point. And I love that you mentioned holding this space and holding the idea and understanding that you're not the expert of their life. They're the expert, and you get to walk alongside them and collaborate with them. And I mean, for me personally, that's a value that I hold in all my therapy sessions that I did during my internship is there's a lot of different people with a lot of different walks of life. And if you come in thinking you're the expert of them, I'm not so sure how much progress you'll actually make. And I think, just as you were talking, it's such a good point to bring up is that if you haven't been in their shoes, there's no point in marching on over there acting like you know everything about what this is like for them.
As you're speaking, in my courses right now, I should mention that I am a master's of counseling and psychology student at Yorkville as well. And we're talking about that whole topic of broaching, like how do we bring up the humility that I don't know what it's like to be in your specific position. And often we think that could be in terms of race or gender or ethnicity or religion, but perhaps it's more also used on micro scales. Like, I don't know what it's like to be a mother, or I don't know what it's like to be a grandmother, or just even a position of authority or a different occupation. And so I think we can boil that humility down to even on a micro scale as well.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And you know, in my experience, when I work with clients who had vastly different experiences than I had, um, if I just explained, you know, I'm actually not so sure what that's like. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? It was often met with, I don't want to, I'm not sure gratitude is the right word, but it was like you can almost see a sense of like, oh, okay, like a sense of relief of like, I'm just being authentic with them. And I think that's how you can build that therapeutic alliance so much more than if I pretended like I knew everything about this specific life experience when I have absolutely no idea. And through that, you can work together. And I just found that was one kind of like relieving for the client, and two, it just you got to learn so much more that way.
Absolutely. When you're speaking, it reminds me of a quote by Brene Brown, and she was speaking about qualifications of counselors to work with different populations. And I'm going to butcher it again, and I might not be saying exactly the way she said it, but she said something along the lines of you don't have to walk in the same shoes that the other person has walked in. You don't have to have the same job. You don't have to have come from the same race or ethnicity or culture, but it does significantly help if you've ever experienced the same emotions, if you've ever experienced love, hate, anger, anguish, grief. Um, those are the things that you can really build a relationship on, as opposed to having the exact same life experience.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, specifically about building the relationship. And, you know, I do think it's important to note that it is a therapist's responsibility to understand different populations and backgrounds and experiences and do research and not rely on your client to educate you. But I just think in terms of building that relationship, if you are authentic with them and what you do and don't know, I find it is a lot more helpful. And I could see how this could extend to agricultural informed care too, is, you know, I don't fully understand and I don't know, but let me learn about you and your experience so we can work together.
Absolutely. And the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance has actually done a really good job at putting together courses for um, mental health professionals on that very topic. So if you have zero understanding about anything to do with Canadian agriculture, or I should say North American agricultural, the North American agricultural industry in general, it starts from scratch of to what are the different farms that we find in North America? What is the average size of a farm? How many people do you find on a farm? What is it like? What um, is a yearly cycle like for individuals there too? And the other beautiful thing about what they've put together is that when you think of what a Canadian farmer is, and you were to close your eyes and to picture someone in your head, very rarely do we go to someone of color. Very rarely do we go to someone that's not of European descent, or maybe English or French speaking, or even, Indigenous. And so what they've done is also respectfully acknowledge the roots of agricultural history in Canada and North America in general, saying that this is just a new creation within the last 100 years of immigration. You know, farming in North America is thousands of years old. And how has that developed and changed in a historical context as well? And how have we integrated not just European settlers and colonialization as well, but how have we um, had different cultures and ethnicities come um, into this picture as well, which is really fascinating. And I think, even just a quick example when we talk about farming in southern Alberta, there is a huge Japanese farming population in southern Alberta. And a lot of those roots can be traced back to World War II and the prisoner of war camps that we had here in southern Alberta that not a lot of people know of. And so understanding that when you pick up a Lay's potato chip, what is that ripple effect that has happened from that potato farmer that has been here for so many generations, maybe forcibly displaced from their original, place of origin and brought here, and then continued a legacy from that historical trauma. So it's just a fascinating history to get into, and it's one that I'm very passionate about. And I think as mental health professionals, it's just the starting to open up a book of just interesting, huge history that we have here in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for pointing that out and bringing that up. And just out of curiosity, these resources and these courses, are these things that can just be found on the National Farmer Alliance website? Are they free? How do people access them?
Yeah, so they are courses that you can follow in a certain order on the website. Now they are paid courses. We are working on trying to develop if there is either a discount or a student package. We're trying to develop that to make it more accessible to counseling students. But I find it is a great resource if you are potentially wanting any continuing education credits, if you need any of those things. Or if you're just trying to develop a better background, if you are finding that you are going to work in a rural setting or with rural individuals in general. So yeah, it's in the works, but those courses are available right now at a designated cost online.
Awesome, thank you. Um, Shifting gears a bit, I'm a little curious about, we talked about stigma, about how psychologists and therapists might be viewed, but I'm wondering about stigma within the agricultural community as a whole. You grew up in a farming family, and I'm just wondering, from your experience or meeting with others, if you feel like farmers themselves feel like there's a stigma about mental health, and if they are individuals, I mean, naturally, of course, we can't speak for everybody, but just wondering, is there a stigma in mental health within that community?
I think, again, I have to be very careful about generalized statements. I think there has started to be a shift for sure, as more people are connected through social media platforms, as we see more access and interconnectivity online with those that do have access. Um, I think one of the stigmas is, again, this is usually an educated urban individual that is trying to help someone that isn't urban based. Um, and so there is sometimes that little barrier that goes up in an individual's mind of how can you help me if you don't even know what it's like to even be out here. So while that is changing, and I think we are getting better at having more open conversations, I don't want to say there's a generational gap because that is too general of a statement. I can only speak to my own family, and I know my parents would never have considered of seeking mental health help for their own personal issues. But I don't necessarily know if that is just a rural thing. I think that could be also a generational thing as
Right.
well. If we think about, our parents or our grandparents, that might not just be an agricultural difference. Um, Stigmas, I think, are a lot of assuming that, like if I'm a farmer, the first thing that comes to mind is I don't want someone who has a PhD thinking that they're better than me.
Mhm.
Even though I might have a university education, a master's
Mhm.
degree myself as a farmer, many agricultural individuals are getting higher education than have ever had before. Um,
Hmm.
but I think there is definitely a still of a, I don't want someone to think that they're better than me. Um, and tell me what to do because there is a strong independence in people that have to work and be isolated and be entrepreneurs on themselves. Um, I think there just is a need for both sides to maybe have a little bit more openness and humility, and then we can come forward and see. I think there's also a sense of, if I admit that I need help, what's going to happen for a lot
Right,
of people as well?
right.
What if they can't help me, even though I finally say I need help? Is that disappointment worse than pretending I don't need help as well? So I don't know. Just these thoughts are floating around in my head. And again, I can't speak in a generalized sense for everybody. I can just speak to my own experience.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so valuable, and again just comes back to that understanding of maybe what mental health professionals should be considering if this is the area of work that they want to go into, is how can I meet farmers where they're at, and how can I maybe let go of some of what I've been taught in school about how to act and how to have this blank neutral face to everything, or can I do walk and talk therapy as they show me, what they're working on, or just meeting
Right.
them with where they're at rather than where you think they should be.
Absolutely. Um, and another thing, like we've been talking specifically about farmers,
Mhm.
which is a huge part of the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance. But there's also a subsection within that when we talk about the veterinary industry.
Yeah.
And, you know, even within that, that can break up into, large animal versus small animal, rural practices versus urban practices. And in speaking to, stigmas that we face in the veterinary industry, regarding mental health, it's a lot of, you know, push through, and then enjoy the time off when you have it, but push through and get through this. And you just got to go. And that is a whole nother ball of wax we can get into.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate bringing that up because I was going to ask about, because I did see on the website, farmers and veterinarians. And, one of the first things that comes to my mind, actually, mainly through talking with you about working in a vet clinic, is um, the amount of death that vets deal with. And, we hear a lot about it in doctors and surgeons, and um, the trauma that they face through losing patients. But aside from, really talking with you, I haven't heard very many people talk about what vets go through during those times. And I'm wondering if maybe you can just speak a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So, the first thing I want to say is that when we talk about the veterinary industry, not everybody that works within the veterinary industry is a doctor or a veterinarian.
Right.
So it's important to know that, there's the veterinarians, which are doctors. There's veterinary technicians, which are the nurses. There's the veterinary technician assistants, and then you also have veterinary reception staff. So I will get to your question for sure, but a lot of people think, as a child, I want to grow up and work with animals. I want to become a vet. But there are so many other positions within that do different roles that are surrounding that same circumstance. For example, euthanasia, that take different roles within that. So while the veterinarian is the one responsible for administering the medicine used in a euthanasia, the veterinary staff that prepares that animal for euthanasia also goes through uh, quite a process emotionally as well. So you have, maybe the people at the front desk that get that first call with someone bawling on the phone saying, I think it's time.
Mhm.
And walking someone through that is a mini counseling session in and of itself, right? Because you don't just call a vet clinic and speak to a doctor most times. You are calling and speaking with the front desk staff or maybe a technician. So working someone through, how do we talk about, the finances of an appointment for euthanasia? How do we ethically talk about, how do we know when it's time for that to happen? How do we work with someone who we've known come through for years here with that patient as a puppy, and then as a young dog, and then as a senior animal as well? And how do we know that they're going to have the best experience possible for that appointment? Then you have the nurses that prepare the animal for the vet. they're in the
Mm.
back and they are absolutely loving on that animal the best they can. And they're working with that animal. They don't want that animal to be in pain while they prepare the animal. And then you have the vet that actually goes in and does the euthanasia itself. So there's a lot of aspects into that. And getting back to your original question, sorry, I know I kind of went on a tangent
Oh,
there.
thank you.
Um, Even the euthanasia itself, most vets will tell you, isn't the hard part about the job.
Mm.
It it isn't a difficult decision when an animal is suffering or in pain to help that animal no longer be in suffering and pain, because that is the vet's entire job, is to
Mm.
make sure animals aren't suffering or in pain.
Mhm.
The hardest part about the job is usually the people not understanding why we have to do certain things that we have to do. When my manager put it in an interesting way, she said, when we end up feeling like we care for the animal more than the owner does,
Mm.
it makes you feel helpless because you have resources to help. And again, this isn't in every case with every owner, but when an owner either financially can't afford to help their animals, which we're seeing a huge increase in right now,
Mm.
or when an owner honestly just doesn't want to do all of the things that we would need to in order to take the best care possible of their pet. So that's definitely hard. Um, One of the veterinarians I work with the other day had someone say, with all the price increase that's going on in the world, I deserve to be paid more. Gas is going up, houses are going up, groceries are going up, but your services shouldn't go up. It's not worth it. And, it's such a
Mm.
slap in the face to someone who works hard and puts what they love on the line every day to not have value put into what they do. Veterinary services are very expensive. They are not covered by healthcare. Um, and so a lot of people just are feeling a huge financial strain right now, which puts a lot of constricts on what they can and can't do for their pets. And that's really hard in the veterinary industry to see people limited by finances um, to not be able to afford help for their pets.
Yeah. I mean, wow, thank you for sharing all of that information. I mean, from, educating me and potential listeners about it's not just the doctor vet themselves that is managing euthanasia, it's a whole line of people who are also involved in those moments to learning about, financial restrictions and cost of living and how that impacts care for their animals and how you are all seeing that happen. And I can imagine it would feel very helpless because it's not like you can do much about, the cost of things or pay for it yourselves. That's just not realistic. And can imagine how difficult it would be to see that, especially because, I know you personally, so I know how much you care about animals and this field and are passionate about humans and their emotions and feelings too. And I just imagine there must be a lot of heavy days. Would I be correct in thinking that?
Absolutely. And then bringing this back to, an agricultural or farming perspective, a lot of farmers that raise animals are in a place of stewardship over large amount of herd numbers. And so feel a huge sense of responsibility over every single animal that they've, seen been born, raised, and then go through the entire life cycle themselves. And so, in the veterinary industry and in the farming industry, you get to a point where, again, death isn't even the hardest part. It's seeing suffering and financial limitations come into play for a lot of services. You know, um, yeah, it's you have compassion and empathy for people going through it. And, you know, from a veterinary perspective, your heart breaks for clients when they lose a pet. From a farming perspective, it can be devastating to see an animal that you have had to put down or see, no longer make it. But there's also, I don't want to say a wall, but a boundary that you put in place that allows you to continue to love others as you love yourself so that you can keep working in that place, which is a very hard boundary to establish if you haven't had practice, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I can imagine. And you know, we've talked a lot about mental health services to farmers, and I am wondering, you know, do you think that mental health services are accessible for veterinarians and people in the veterinary industry as well? Or is that something, because again, like this is not stuff that you're taught in school. It's not a population that gets talked about really at all from my experience.
Right.
And I'm just be curious, do you know? Like, do you know if mental health services are more available, or do they have time, or are they open to it, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, so again, like I can't speak to every veterinary profession across Canada. Um, the ABVMA is what we have in Alberta, that kind of governs what veterinary professionals are able to do within our province. So they set our regulations, they set our standard of practice. Um, they have provided some online mental health resources for vets. The quality of those I can't speak to as I've never partaken in them. I have heard mixed reviews on the associations or the online resources that they've provided for vets in terms of how easy they are to book, how easy they are to access. Are you getting the same mental health professional each time, or is it a new person each time, like a hotline? Um, where I think there is definitely room for improvement as opposed to just asking people to take their own personal continuing education on the topics is potentially working into an average workday at a veterinary hospital a slightly different shift as opposed to how things are done. So standard um, day in the life at a vet hospital that I worked at, and again, not all hospitals are the same, are usually 12-hour shifts with an hour break for lunch somewhere in there. You're usually on your feet for those full 12 hours, and you're going to be doing many different things all at the same time. Where, yes, you are dealing with euthanasia and a puppy appointment and some crazy disease and maybe a walk-in at the same time. You have all these emotions and you're trying to lean on your team, but sometimes you have to take a step back for yourself, and emotions can run high. We know in the vet industry is primarily women. It is not a male-dominated industry. So how we work with different genders as well within high stressful situations can look different as well. I think where I'm going with this conversation is that I'd love to see more top-down regulation on how we integrate almost not a mandatory mental health procedure, but recognizing that, you know, your average veterinarian is usually a woman working a 12-hour shift that usually has a family at home as well. When we think of farmers and, you know, they don't have a start and an end time, but yeah, 12, 14, 16-hour days. And if you're a woman, yeah, that means that in the middle of that, you're also coordinating your children, you're also coordinating their schedules. There are a lot of traditional roles that still happen in the farming industry, where that means mom might be in charge of providing, you know, nutrition for the family and grocery shopping and doing a lot of finances and documentation and accounting for the family. So yeah, I think I don't know where we need to improve, but I know in the vet industry there needs to be more top-down help,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable point to bring up. And again, like thank you for providing, you know, these perspectives, because these are things that I personally haven't considered, because I feel I'm so far removed from that community and that world. And I think just hearing you talk, I mean, I can imagine like working a 12-hour day of a lot of different things, heavy appointments, happy appointments, all within constantly going to come home to your family and having to be uh on for your family and ready to go for your family and doing that day in and day out, is it realistic to be like, oh, you know what, I should book a therapy appointment and take some time for myself? I'm not so sure, and especially, as a female myself, for what I've heard from other women is, and certainly men too, is this idea of, is it selfish of me to step away from my family and do something for myself? Is it selfish of me to take a day off from the clinic and do something for myself? But I think if there is some type of regulation of like, no, we care about this in you, and we're going to make sure that you do have that time, can maybe take some of that guilt away, can give you some of that time to be able to do it. It can do a whole lot of different things.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. If you have someone that's working 4 12-hour shifts in a row, the last thing they're going to want to do when they get their one day off or their first day off is, okay, now I need to book all of my appointments and get that in. And I need to be emotionally vulnerable when I'm pretty emotionally frazzled after 4 days of helping everybody else.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've often wondered, is this a case where we should be doing like micro helping? So every morning when you clock in and every night when you clock out, a one sentence reflection. Is this a questionnaire that you can fill out to kind of gauge? Is this a monthly appointment that you have with your mental health professional versus weekly to just help, with longer time spans between so you don't feel as scheduled? There's a lot of room for discussion here. And I think we need to turn it back to those that are working in the industry, that the actual veterinarians, the actual nurses, the actual farmers, and ask what would be best for you
Mm.
in that sense and what works best with your life and your schedule and how do you want to be supported.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because I was even thinking back to farmers and thinking about, when they have those 13 to 16-hour days, and what are things that they would maybe want to learn that they could do during those days. And I don't know, like, could it be that they could have like a mindfulness thing that they can do while they're working that they find helpful to do during the day, just to relax your nervous system even, or calm some of that anxiety, like somatically. I would just be curious about those kinds of things. And you're totally right. Like, I don't know. I haven't talked to a farmer about this aside from you, but would those be realistic things? And do they have to be these weekly therapy appointments and changing their whole life, or can we integrate things that are actually going to be helpful to them, depending on, of course, what they would say.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think everything is, of course, as is always the frustrating answer, a case by case basis. Um, Again, there's so many different individuals that come from so many different walks of life, so many different religions, so many different ethnicities that then also filter into the categories of farmers, veterinarians, agricultural producers that, yeah, working with them to figure out what works best for them is really, I think, the only answer.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You know, one thing I wanted to ask you about is sleep and mental health. We are drilled in undergrad and grad school that the correlations between sleep and well-being are huge, and sleep hygiene is so important. And I'm hearing vets working 12-hour shifts, farmers working as much as they need to be working for that time. And I'd be curious, did you notice maybe growing up or where you're currently at, is there a big lack of sleep? And if so, do you think that that's something that maybe could be talked about more within this community?
Oh, absolutely. I think lack of sleep is definitely a relevant topic when we think about, even just certain times of the year. Well, you're going to be sleeping less as a farmer. If you're in the middle of calving season, a lot of cows calve out in the middle of the night. So that means you're staying up throughout the night to watch for any difficulties that they might be having. You're bringing them in, you're working in some of the coldest weather sometimes during the year, or even during harvest season. You got to go when the temperature is right. You can't wait until the sun comes up sometimes, or you have to wait until the sun dries out things and you just have to go until it's done. Um, in the veterinary industry, you're working potentially on an emergency situation until the last minute when you clock out, which might be 2 hours before you're supposed to go to bed at night.
Mm.
So how are you supposed to calm your system down within, 90 minutes to just have a nice 6 hour sleep before you wake up maybe at 5 or 6 next morning to get ready for your day again?
Mm.
So yeah, I think sleep hygiene can definitely be a good topic to talk about. Again, every individual is going to have their own unique story and casework that you're going to work with them on. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a very relevant topic for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can just imagine how that could play, especially as you mentioned, cows being born in the middle of the night. You gotta be there.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember my first week working at an emergency vet clinic, and I think for the first month I was having nightmares that I was not triaging emergencies properly as they were coming in. And I just had this reoccurring dream of, this German Shepherd being hit by a car, and how do you triage this properly? And you're thinking like, I'm not even the vet, and I'm having all of these worries and feelings of responsibility for this family. And yeah, it can be, as someone who wants to help others, and a lot of people that get into the veterinary profession are people who want to help,
Mhm.
there's a lot of feeling of responsibility and anxiety on, am I going to do this wrong? So
Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely.
I can imagine. And you're so right with that, right? Like anybody who is in any type of helping profession, anybody who has been a farmer and stayed a farmer, I would imagine is because there's so much passion for that line of work. And with that comes, like you said, probably a huge amount of feelings of responsibility to do a good job, to show up for this, to put your best foot forward as often as you can. And that's a lot to take on and a lot to manage when you are also working high demand jobs.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, you grew up in this world as a fourth generation farmer, right? That's what you said, fourth.
Yeah.
What is something you wish you knew growing up about mental health that and this community that maybe you know now and that you would hope that mental health professionals would be able to educate people on and teach others?
It's a really good question. One of the strengths of living in a rural area is also one of the weaknesses, which is that isolation.
Mm.
Um, it provides great opportunity for self-reflection, but it also provides an ample opportunity to get stuck in a certain pattern of thinking without having outside perspectives to help get you out. So it really was helpful in developing an early sense of self-awareness as a child and young adult, because you might be sitting for 8 hours on a tractor with nothing but your thoughts, because half the
Mm.
time the radio didn't work. So So what are you going to do for 8 hours but get lost in your thoughts and go down rabbit holes and potentially develop a cyclical thinking pattern about a problem, and you could stew on things? Or can you use this as an opportunity for a lot of self-reflection and growth and, mental work on yourself? So I guess the thing I wish I knew was that you are your own best friend and your own best advocate.
Mm.
No one knows you better than yourself. But the truth is that we all need a witness to our lives and our problems.
Mm.
And, what is it that you want to share with someone else? What is it that you want to have someone be a witness to?
Mm.
And then how, like, I guess just kind of practicing how you share your own personal story, because there is a lot of fear, I think, about opening up to a stranger, that it can be difficult for a lot of people to do.
Yeah. Oh, just for everybody watching, how excited are you for Desiree's future clients when she's a psychologist? Like, my goodness, that wisdom is so wonderful. And what I love what I've loved through this whole conversation is just your continual drawback to being humble and holding a place of humility to learn from others. And I know that in your practice, it's going to extend to even not just people in the agricultural community, that is going to go into all of your client sessions. And I love it. And my goodness, you are a wealth of wisdom. And I'm so thankful that you were here today to talk about this with us, because I learned so much. I'm certain other people learned so much. And this is such a niche area of mental health, I think, that I didn't know really any of this before today. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. And yeah, if anybody wants to learn more, they can take a look at the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance website and get more connected that way. We have a lot of affiliates that have taken the courses that are now counseling. And so the site will send them referrals of people that are interested that have taken the courses. So a good place to learn more if you are interested. And thank you again, Lisa, for having me on today.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what I'll do is I'll link the website in the comments of this video or the description. I never know. One of the two, so people can go ahead and just click there and learn more about it. So we will end there. And again, just thank you to Desiree and for her willingness to share about the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance agency themselves, along with learning about the agricultural community. This has been wonderful.